Hello, my name is Tony Paniagua, and I am a volunteer with Odyssey Storytelling. I discovered this organization more than 10 years ago, and the reason I became involved is because you hear from a diverse group of people every single month with amazing stories, personal and moving stories. So I became a huge fan of Odyssey Storytelling. It was established, as a matter of fact, in 2004 by Penelope Starr. So technically, this is our sweet 16th anniversary. But of course, 2020 has been anything but sweet. It has been bittersweet because of the coronavirus, COVID-19. It is an invisible virus that has devastated billions of lives around the world. And it has had a tragic impact right here in the United States as well, of course. When we came up with this theme, Invisible, for our September show, this was last year, so we had no idea that coronavirus was going to be an issue. We came up with the theme because we wanted to talk about groups of people, sometimes people who are ignored, they're not engaged, consulted, or acknowledged, and they feel different, they feel invisible, they feel like they're not part of the group. Sometimes this is very evident in border communities around the world. Here in the United States, we have a border that stretches approximately 2,000 miles between the Pacific Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, between Mexico and the United States. And this is a region where many people have grown up wondering about their status in life, about their belonging in society. Our first storyteller is Czarina Nafarrate.
I was born in Tucson to Mexican parents who at the time lived in Agua Prieta, Sonora, my first home. And now my parents had never had plans to move to the United States or anything like that. But they had a Mexican-American daughter now. So they planned way ahead for me. All of my toys, all of my movies. I even went to a bilingual kindergarten. I was learning English from a very early age. And I actually ended up crossing the border every day to attend private school in Douglas, Arizona once I hit grade school. So everything was going fine. I was living in Mexico, studying in the United States, when my dad's job required him to move. And what I had been preparing my whole life of 9 years was finally here. I was moving to the United States. And so we moved, and I was in third grade, and I was ready to crush it. I was ready to crush public school. I was moving to another border town. This time it was on the American side. I figured it would not be different. I made friends quickly, and I began what came to be a long, long streak of being teacher's pet, much to my little brother's chagrin. My ethnicity, my nationality, where I was from, where I was living, had never been an issue until it was brought up that I had an accent by my friend's mom, Carmen, a blonde, beautiful, blue-eyed, third-generation Mexican-American. And I still remember that moment vividly. We were in the school library, and I was talking about Harry Potter when I mispronounced the word, as third graders are wont to do when talking about fake magical worlds. And no one noticed until Carmen laughed. She laughed and pointed out my error and pointed out my accent. And suddenly I felt inferior. I felt dumb. I felt like my Spanish was a burden I had to carry. And that single comment ignited an inner battle that would rage on for decades. Because at that moment, I became that dash between Mexican American. Because I wasn't Mexican, but clearly I wasn't American either. Ni de aquí, ni de allá. I was in this dark space in between, not knowing who I really was, but knowing it wasn't enough. So I had an accent. Okay, I was 9. I had time to perfect my English and push away this lower, dumber language that was getting in the way. I consciously made a decision to start hanging out with the English-speaking kids. I started speaking English at home, which my parents were not a fan of, but it was fine because I was all American, baby. Or, as my family would put it, the gringa. As the years went by, my English did get better, but my Spanish, not so much. I mean, I was and still am fluent, but communicating with my family has become an effort, especially with the ones who only speak Spanish. My thoughts are in English now, so it's easier for me to express myself in that way. And estes, como se dices, fill my vocabulary. And Spanglish is my crutch. So leave it to another adult in my life to shame me for that. When we'd visit Mexico, my brother and I would communicate almost exclusively in English because, again, both of us had learned English from a young age, and that's how we felt most comfortable. But then every time my Uncle Miguel came around, he'd belittle us. He'd sneer at us and label us self-hating pochos, a really awful slur you don't want to be called when you're Mexican. It means you don't know how to speak the language and that you're not part of the culture. Once again, my bilingualism felt like a burden. Americans were laughing at me and Mexicans felt betrayed by me. Fuck it, I'll be invisible. Around Americans, I changed my name. I anglicized it to make it easier for them to say and harder for them to figure out what I was. Ooh, Czarina, like the Russian czar, I love it. Are you Russian? With no accent and light enough skin, I typically would just laugh it off and say, oh, I was born in Tucson, actually, hoping that there would be no follow-up. And there rarely ever was. Around Mexicans, it was a little sadder. I just avoided them. I stopped hanging out with my family, tias, tios, cousins. I looked down on the labels like Chicano and Chicana, and I convinced myself that that just wasn't me. That I was too white, too gringa, that I was already too late, and what was the point of putting in the effort? So I leaned into being a gringa, and I leaned hard. I graduated from college with a degree in French. I started doing improv. I started dating white guys. That one's a joke, kind of. But then 2016 came around. And it changed the lives of many of us. And there was a public figure speaking about Mexicans being criminals, being rapists, being the worst that come to the United States. And all the times that I try to hide away that accent, my Spanish, it finally became clear for what it was. I was hiding my ethnicity. I was hiding my identity. My parents' immigration story, all of that. I was hiding who I was. So at 25, I didn't want to be invisible anymore. I started seeking my family out, hanging out with my tata, my tios, spending more time with them. I started speaking Spanish, and I even created a Spanish playlist of all my childhood favorites, including Piporro, Tatiana, and some 70s crooners like Camilo Sesto. I was finally giving in to what had been my whole life, my Spanish, my identity. I even founded Arizona's first all-Spanish speaking improv team, Como Se Dice, which led to Tucson's first all-Spanish comedy show, Carcajadas. Because I am Czarina Nafarrate, daughter of immigrants, trilingual, and a badass Chicana. Sorry, young Sadina, that's the thing.
I'm not sure if you noticed, but Sadina was wearing a t-shirt that says, monolingualism can be cured. Monolingualism can be cured. How do you do that? You study or you learn a second language, or maybe a third, or maybe a fourth, or more. Here's our next storyteller, Albrecht Classen.
I was 9 years old when I lived in a completely monolingual world. I grew up in the middle of Germany, and my parents spoke only German. My siblings all spoke just German. Everyone in the little town I grew up, just German. No one knew any foreign language. Even, let's say, Spanish was exotic. Italian, no one knew anything. England, English, not so much. So I grew up really in a very monolingual world, when one day my father, who was a teacher, came home and said, we are going to Finland. Now, well, Finland. For me as a 9-year-old, Finland? Where's Finland? Finland is Northern Europe. Finland, well, they don't speak German there. My God, they speak Finnish. Finnish is a non-Indo-European language. Oh my God, I thought, what am I going to do? My parents tried to sort of kind of help us a little bit. They were worried, of course. And so they brought some records home at that time, records, no tapes or anything. So to learn at least a little bit English. And I didn't want to. I hated the whole idea. And so, well, eventually we moved to Finland. And I lived there then for 3 years, which was basically just a transfer from my monolingual world in Germany to a monolingual German environment, because I went to a German school there. I spoke in German with my parents. I spoke in German with some of the friends, but I didn't really learn Finnish. However, the second year, I, like all the other Finnish school kids, had to take, because Finland is a bilingual country, had to learn Swedish. So all Finnish kids learn Swedish, and all Swedish kids in Finland learn Finnish. So I'm in that classroom, and I get my textbook, I open it up, and I see it is, of course, a textbook for Finnish kids. So it's all in Finnish in order to learn Swedish. Well, wait a minute, I thought. I don't know Finnish. I don't want to learn Swedish. So what the hell is going on here? Of course, I completely failed the class, and my parents were horrified. And then the thing got even worse, because after 3 years, we moved back to Germany. At that time, I was 12. Everyone at my grade had learned already for 1 year English. Uh-oh, my mother got really worried. So she started sitting down with me and tried to teach me some English. So I start my first school year back in Germany. I have my English class. I utterly failed. Utterly. I knew nothing. It was awful. Oh my God, my parents were horrified. I was horrified. No one knew really what to do. And then the next year, something amazing happened, because then I suddenly had to take another language. I had a choice between French or Latin. So I chose Latin, and suddenly something hit me, and I began to realize, oh, to learn a language, you need to know grammar, you need to know vocabulary, you need to know how to pronounce it. There are rules. And I started to learn, and suddenly my English picked up. That was all great. And in a few years later, I think my English was very, very good. But then I had these odd experiences. When I was about 14, I participated in a student exchange with England. So I visited someone and stayed with him for about 3 weeks. That was middle of England, sort of Mansfield near Nottingham. So I'm getting there, and yes, I can talk with this person. We had already written to each other. And I suddenly realized I could not understand his parents or his siblings. They all spoke dialects. Oh my God. So for 3 weeks, I always have to ask my friend, what did your mom say? What did your dad say? I could not figure that out. Well, you know, there are lots of dialects, and it's just like you're going to Australia today and you think you can, of course, speak English, but no, they speak a completely different English. Oh, well, I managed somehow. But then I graduated and I started to study, and I had then a great opportunity to go to America, and I studied in Millersville, Pennsylvania. And I remember very clearly, I was very proud about my English at that time. And then getting to Philadelphia and being picked up and then taken to the college. And I suddenly realized once again, I did not understand anyone. Why? Because they spoke American, and I'd learned the British English. It took me at least 3 weeks to understand, really, to get the sound and to figure out, oh, that's the way how they pronounce it, and that's the word they use. Oh, so it was really very, very difficult. But anyway, I managed, had a wonderful time, and in a way, I believe I really changed, became an American. I really, in my heart, my mind, I really became an American. and their language was one of the major things. Moving fast forward a little bit, then I kept studying. I went actually to England. I studied in Oxford. And then I had a great opportunity to go on an Eastern Mediterranean cruise. So we went on a big ship from Athens to Alexandria. Again, I was in a very monolingual situation. All the Germans all sitting together and the Americans sitting all together and the Spanish or whatever, all sitting together at breakfast and so forth. One day, however, I think it was a Saturday morning, I got up a little bit earlier than everyone else. And I get into the cafeteria, and then the waiter says, oh, let me sit you down here. So I'm sitting at that table, and there to my right, there are two Colombians. Across from me, there are two American women, a mother and a daughter. And by the way, in the meantime, I had learned fairly well to speak Spanish. So I suddenly realized if I communicated a little bit, I could get the whole conversation going. So I started to translate, or first talk to the Colombians in Spanish, and then I translated that into English for them. And these two women, both came from Hawaii, were very happy that finally there was someone who could speak. So then I translated their English into those people's Spanish, and all things went quite well. And well, things then developed further because this young woman went up with me after breakfast, and because she was so impressed that I could speak actually in 3 languages, well, we struck kind of a friendship, and then things developed further. Later, we exchanged letters, then we visited each other, well, and then we married. So the language has really helped me in that regard, and I would always say, learn a language, fall in love, and you will make it in life. So, but the whole situation, of course, with my language remains a very complicated thing, because in the meantime, I also had learned Italian, and I also use some medieval languages, and sometimes, honestly, I get really mixed up. And when I speak English, suddenly my German structure comes in. When I speak German to my colleagues, they say, huh? What are you saying? I repeat myself, and they say, wait a minute, that is not the way how we are saying this anymore. And so then I realize once you live in one country, you begin to make all kinds of transfer mistakes. So whenever I visit one of my sisters, for example, back in Germany, I have to train myself really hard before I visit them. And I have to tell myself, wait a minute, they don't use simple past tense anymore. So I cannot use the simple past tense, use only present perfect. So I watch myself, and since I'm then very careful, they say after a few days, hey, you didn't make any mistake. I said, yeah, well, I tried very hard. So you can see this whole situation with languages is a very complicated thing. But I must also say, now I speak, of course, and write in English. I still write very much in German. I have lots of contacts in Spanish and Italian. And I think that's really, for me, the future of this world. I want to be multilingual. I want to be a member of the multilingual world. I want to reach out to people all over the world. After all, I'm a teacher, I'm a university professor, and this is really my absolute delight and my joy. Now I can speak with people all over South and Central America. I can speak with Indians all over the world, whomever I meet. And so I'm very proud and very happy that with these various languages, not only did I become a sort of a global citizen, I hope, but I also met the woman of my life, and I'm very happy about that.
So you may have noticed Albrecht Classen's office at the University of Arizona. Did you notice all those books? He has thousands of books in his office. And by the way, he has written more than 100 books himself. So kudos to you and congratulations, Professor Classen. Here's a question for you. When you think of home, what comes to your mind? Do you think of the place where you were born, the place where you grew up, or the place where you live now? Our next storyteller is combining all of those three on her journey to another country. And by the way, Alma Montañez is the sister of Ana Montañez, who is the executive director of Odyssey Storytelling and the producer of this show, who did a lot for this program. Thank you very much, Ana. But now let's go to Alma Montañez for our next story.
So I'm going to take you back about 15 years. I am, at the time, 25 years old or so. It's 9, 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and I am sitting on the 34th floor of 101 Park Avenue, looking down on Grand Central Station in the city that never sleeps. And I feel like I have made it, right? I am a junior lawyer, and this is what success looks like, even though it's 9, 10 o'clock and I'm starving waiting for my takeout while poring over documents. In the middle of this, my phone rings, and it's Mark. Mark is one of the senior partners at my law firm, and he would like me to stop by my office when I have a moment. That means run up like now. So I go up to see Mark. Mark is second only to George in the firm's global hierarchy. Now, this is going to be the first of 3 pauses, I think. One of the first things I learned as a baby lawyer is that in America, professionals go by their first names, which is a little weird, right? You're in grade school, it's Mr. this, Miss that, Mrs. this, and then you go to college and it's Professor this, Professor that, same thing in law school, and then all of a sudden it's Mark and George, like we're equal, because that's part of American culture, right? Equality, democracy, it's sacrosanct, so we're all the same. We know we're not, but we don't address it. So, okay, back to Mark. I get to his office, and Mark would like to know if I'd be interested in working out of the Mexico City office for a while. Of course I would. Great. How about Thursday? It's Tuesday night. Yeah, so can I arrange a visa tomorrow and be on a plane on Thursday? I don't need a visa from there, but I do need my dry cleaning. So Friday? Perfect. Great. The apartment will be ready and the office will be expecting me. So Friday morning, I arrive in Mexico because in a matter of minutes, you can just move countries. That's the way things work apparently in the world. So I arrive bleary-eyed and jet-lagged and show up at reception. Buenos días, soy Alma Montañez. Creo que la señorita Ángeles me está esperando. Claro que sí, licenciada Montañez. Un momento, por favor. Licenciada. Okay, this is new, this is different. So I'm pausing again. In Mexico, we are very formal. We address people by their professional titles. Licenciado, meaning you have a bachelor's. Doctor, obvious, you're a doctor. Ingeniero, you're an engineer. Profesor, you get the picture. If you don't have a title, there's some class issues there. So that's what that's about. Beyond that, you alternate between the formal and the informal. The usted for elders and people who merit respect, like professionals. And the tú, which is reserved for your peers. And if you're feeling really classist, anyone below you on the social hierarchy. So with that, I go into this and obviously I know I was going to be using these titles to address these folks. I just never really thought about myself that way. But I adapt, it's what I do, so I figure I will. Later that day, I make my way to the ladies' room, and because it's Mexico, there's an attendant. And the attendant in the ladies' room is a young brown girl who looks like my family. She looks so much like, some version of me or my mom. And she says to me, "Aquí tiene, señorita." And she hands me a towel. And she addresses me in the usted. And I say, no, por favor, tuteame. Because I feel like I'm charming and, young. I can get away with just being cute like that. And she blushes and she shakes her head. She says, no, señorito. And I see that she's uncomfortable. And my heart sinks a little bit. She's addressing me in the formal. I'm not older than her. I don't outrank her in the social hierarchy. I have more in common with this young woman than with anyone else in this office. Culturally, we're from the same strata of Mexican life. We come from the country. We speak like simple folk. Or I used to. But I'm out of place and out of context. I'm the American. I've got the fancy degrees. I speak unaccented English. I speak the kind of Mexican Spanish you hear on the evening news. And I've just asked her to break all the social rules by speaking to me as a peer, and I've made her uncomfortable. So I have to let it go. Same thing then happens with Isidro, who is a charming dude who can do anything. He's our facilities manager, which really means he does fix everything, and he does everything that no one with a fancy professional title would dare do. And I really would like for him to be, a friend, because we're like the same age. But it's tough. Licenciada, always licenciada. He's friendly with Sandra. Sandra's my assistant, also about my age. And Sandra gets it. She's broken all the rules. She speaks English. She gets along with, the younger attorneys. And she calls me Alma when it's just the two of us. And we become friends. And one weekend, it dawns on her that we just got to bond, right? So we're going to hang out. We're taking Isidro to a cantina. I'm like, this is perfect. Go, he'll have a couple of drinks, he'll relax, he'll see that I'm actually cool, right? Like I'm one of the people. Many hours later, Isidro's very drunk, and I am still licenciada. And I feel a little bit defeated. Eventually, when we're all sober, he explains to me, it's just not right. Things have a place. Things have an order. Every person has their role. I get it. I do. But it bothers me. And it doesn't bother me when anybody else calls me these things. With the senior attorneys, it's licenciado this, licenciado that, blah, blah, blah. The professional distance makes sense. But with these people, it doesn't. So you may be wondering, why am I so hung up on this? And really, clearly, my own issues, right? But culture grounds us. It gives us a place to belong. It gives us a way of understanding who we are relative to other people. It defines us. It helps us understand ourselves. When I walk into a room today, I am a pretty senior, reasonably capable New York lawyer. It is a big part of my identity. But I also am, and will always be, a girl from Michoacán. Somehow, in translating myself from my culture to American culture and back, I became invisible. The version of myself I see in the mirror doesn't exist anymore. She's been replaced with two versions, an American in Mexico and a Mexican in America, but neither my whole self.
Thank you very much, Alma Montañez, for that wonderful emotional story. She is one of millions of people who has sought and made a better life for herself in this country. Of course, you've all heard of Ellis Island last century and before that, when millions of people came here from Europe. Of course, here along the southern border, many people have also been seeking new lives by entering the United States through the southern border, sometimes seeking asylum, fleeing violence, poverty, and very extreme and difficult, challenging situations. Our next storyteller, Diego Javier Lopez, has worked with some of those people firsthand, and he has been impacted by their stories.
So I hope this story will bring some comfort and recognition of some of the goodwill that our community here in Tucson has done in the past. And this story takes place back in 2018. See, I was a high school teacher here in Tucson, as well as going for my master's in social work, and a volunteer coordinator for a shelter for asylum seekers called Casalitas. This shelter for asylum seekers, you see, when people are released from immigration after claiming asylum at the US border, they come to this shelter where they are provided with food, water, clothing, medical attention, and helping connect to their sponsors, their family members across the United States. And that was my field placement for my master's of social work. Now I'm getting a little too far ahead of the story, but essentially, back in 2018, it was a Friday night. It was about to be my fall break. I was going to a wedding the next day, and I get a call from the director of operations of CCS and the director of Casalitas, and she says, we have a thing going on. That should have been the first sign. She said, we have a thing going on. Immigration is going to release over 1,000 people across Arizona this next few days, and we need to put a shelter together. We need you to the office. This time I thought she was lying. It was a joke. But she's like, no, this is serious. We need you right now. So then I find myself driving there, reflecting on how I got to Casalitos. You see, it was my field placement for my master's in social work. And I wanted to learn Spanish, and I wanted to learn more of my background, my cultural history, and what was the issues in the border. You see, growing up, I didn't learn Spanish. I grew up in Nogales, Arizona, but my mom grew up in Mexico, even though she was a U.S. citizen, and moved here about 8 years old. And when she went to school here, they would pick on her, bully her for speaking Spanish. And she really struggled with that. And then growing up in Nogales myself, I was dyslexic and ADHD. So I always felt invisible, disconnected from everyone. So here I was driving, get to the space, and we're talking. And she's like, okay, we have, these many people, what can we do? And I'm like, I know the perfect place. I'm called one of my mentors in high school. And I say, do you think we could use this church? And he's like, let me make a phone call. I'll call you back in 15, 30 minutes. And at the same time, here we are calling all these churches, the Red Cross, all these groups, seeing about how we can organize as a community to take care of these families. And I get that phone call back and says, we're good. You can come into the space. I'm like, great. And then I start driving home. I talk to my partner, and I'm like, this is what's happening. And she's like, okay, as long as we go to this wedding, my friend's wedding, we got it. So then the next day comes along. I get there early, like half an hour before the Red Cross. Here I am signing for these health kits, these cots, something I would never think in my life I'd be signing for. And then I start talking to volunteers from the shelter, about 16. And they're like, we're here to help. What do you need us to do? I'm like, can you guys get everything organized with me? And then I have to go to this wedding. And they're like, we got it. So then we're getting everything organized. And I talked to this gentleman from the church because they have this pancake breakfast the next morning. He's like, we're not super excited about this, but we're willing to make breakfast for these guys and you just this one night or this one morning. And I'm like, thank you. So then here I go to the wedding, and it was beautiful. We had a great time, food, drinks, walking around the neighborhood, kind of reflecting and talking about what was going on here. But at the same time, as I'm with my partner, enjoying this, wanting and the feeling of my cell phone, wanting to know what's going on. But I fought the urge. So then the next day came, I talked to everyone. Instead of getting the expected 80 people, we got 40, and they decided to not do the travel plans that day. I'm like, great, fantastic. And then the pancake breakfast is finishing up. I get a phone call saying we're getting 80 more people, and we needed to step up the game because they were coming soon. And at the same time as I'm talking to them, the people from this pancake dinner that organized it were like ecstatic because the guests that were there the day before help them cleaning and organizing the kitchen. They're like, look, I know we only said today, but we'll do tomorrow as well, as long as you pay for it. I'm like, great, I'm worrying about all these other things. And they're like, you know what, we'll pay for it. Don't worry about it. We got your back. And as I'm organizing, working on all these things, some of them are watching me do this. And they're like, you know what, Diego, we'll cover breakfast for the rest of the week. And I was so relieved that they stepped up to do that. And then we had this lawyer from the ACLU come through. And he's like, hey, we're seeing these things happen where like people's rights are not being respected. I want to be here for the week. So then he came and worked with everyone's legal case that became an issue. And then we had a doctor from the U of A come, who's a doctor in pediatrics. And he's like, I'm going to get my students to come in and volunteer to do everyone's medical screening. And here we built, originally with 16 volunteers, we grew to about 80, 90 volunteers in a matter of 3 days within the church and different groups in Tucson coming together. And then came Monday morning. At this point, we're about 120 people. We get a phone call that another 80 people are coming. I'm like, okay, we got this. We understand this. And then we get another phone call. The building, the name after the building, the person whose the building was named after died. And that they needed to have the funeral there that Saturday. And I was like, okay, I think we can handle this. We'll make sure this will work. So we're working through it. And then at the same time, I see all of these plans for travel and departures dissipate from the board. Everyone's flights are getting canceled. Buses are going canceled. I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, Hurricane Michael is going on in Florida. And 30% of the people were going to Florida. So we had to work on rescheduling them, planning for the future and such. So I talked to the ACLU lawyer. I'm like, can you help me figure out a shuttle bus for these people? Because if this keeps up, we're going to need at least 2 buses for people. And I was like, okay, I got it. And then the Guatemalan consulate comes in. And they're like, what's going on here? And they're seeing and they're amazed by everything. And they're like, do you know how many people are Guatemalan? And using my skills as a high school teacher, I made a Google form. And I said, 60% of the people coming to the shelter are Guatemalan. And that instant, I saw the tears building in the consulate's eyes. He's like, how can I help? I'm like, be a person here for your people. So every day from then on out, the Guatemalan consulate was there. And they're like, what else do we need? Like, we're trying to figure out this transportation for people. Like, let me see what I can do. So then Tuesday happened. And we got another 80 people came after a phone call. And here I am looking at it. I'm like, we don't have enough cots. So I called the Red Cross and I said, we need more than double what we have. And they're like, okay, we'll get it to you around 4 o'clock tonight. And then I'm looking around how we organize this space. I'm like, this infrastructure is not going to work for this. So then I go and I'm like, I have to talk to everybody at the same time. I go on top of these stadium seating and I start talking to everyone. And here I'm speaking in English saying, like, look, we all have to move and everything. And I have another volunteer standing next to me, translating everything we're saying. So I'm speaking to the volunteers and she's speaking to the guests. And I'm seeing everyone paying attention, seeing what I'm saying, recognizing that we all have to work together, even though we have this language barrier between us, that we can all work together. So within the hour, the guests move everything so we can double our size. The volunteers move everything as well. And we got it figured out. Now, at the same time as I'm organizing this, working with everybody, we're having a community meeting with different religious leaders and nonprofit leaders in Tucson to say we need to be ready to have other shelters open up by Friday. So at 9:30 at night, when everyone's sleeping, I have all these people here. And here I am doing one of the most important presentations in my life, asking who's able to open up as a shelter. And as I'm talking, trying to encourage everyone to take a stand, this one pastor stands up and she's like, just ask us how many people you need us to take. And I'm like, 40. And she's like, we were planning for about 30, but I'll talk to my board and I think we can do it. Another group says 50, another group says 25. And you see the community, all these diverse groups coming together saying, we can stand up, we can do this. So then Wednesday comes along, I'm working with all of these groups. The Red Cross does a training for them to learn how to open up as a shelter. And the Guatemalan consulate and the ACLU lawyer are figuring out how to get a bus to Houston, Texas, because the Guatemalan consulate put together a shelter with the other Guatemalan consulate there for the families. And they're like, okay, we got it. We got a bus. It's going to come on Saturday. This church will take them. We got it all figured out. And they're like, this other religious group's like, wait, we can get another bus from Houston, Texas to Tampa, Florida. If that's going to be helpful. So here we have these different groups that never work together, working together to get the job done. And then Thursday comes along. We have everything put together nicely. And then we find out we're getting another 80 people and people from Yuma as well, because the Yuma shelter was overloaded. So here we are, doubling our spaces, getting everyone moved and opening up some of the church shelters earlier than planned. But everyone is working synchronized and more effective. Now Friday morning comes, and before that we probably spent 14-hour days every day. And here we are, all gathered, talking and organizing who's going to which shelter in Tucson and who's leaving that day. We get another phone call. Immigration said the day before that they were done, but instead they were releasing another 50 people. And here I was sitting there thinking that I have to ask all these other churches if they would be willing to open their doors to another 50 people, and thinking that, how much can we ask of people? And the moment I was sitting there talking to myself about another person, this pastor comes over and she's like, don't worry, we'll make room. And here they go organizing it, figuring out where these new people will go. And as we were getting everything ready and people are starting to leave, I get a phone call that we had an emergency for another individual who was dealing with some mental health issues. And I find myself going over there. And earlier I mentioned that this Friday was my partner's anniversary and I. And everyone knew jokingly that we can organize to get things done. But Friday came along and that evening came along and I found myself working, trying to get this person the care that they needed. And time goes by quickly. And from 3:30, it's 8 o'clock. I call my partner, text. She's like, I'm at my parents' house. She's obviously disappointed. I leave and my boss texts her apologizing. I'm distressed talking to her. And I go pick her up at her parents' house. We go get food and go sit in the park. And we just talk about everything. She came to the shelter more than a dozen times to see how she can help and provide services for the people. And as we're talking, I start crying because of the stress that we were under but understanding the kindness that we have here in Tucson and the willingness that if we all work together, you know, those that oftentimes are invisible in the margins can be seen, and we can bypass any language barriers that exist. Thank you, Tucson.
Even though she was born in this country, she is a U.S. citizen and she speaks English. Our next storyteller sometimes felt like she really did not belong to the community at large. But not only that, she felt that her region, her neighborhood, was also cast aside and made to feel different. Let's all welcome Consuelo Hernandez.
It started to really add up when I was in middle school. I was sitting in the chair at my dentist's office, and I was overhearing a conversation between him and his assistant. He was complaining about not being able to afford the lifestyle that his wife wanted for him. And when his assistant was asking questions, how much money are you talking about, that you can't make it? He started explaining that, or complaining that around $4,000 or $5,000 every 2 weeks wasn't getting him by. And I was just sitting there anxiously because I couldn't wait to go home and share this with my father, because I knew that we didn't make, I've never heard of that amount before and hadn't heard of that amount before in my life. I was a middle schooler, and the very few professional people that I knew of was my mother, who immigrated from Mexico and left her career to take care of me and my siblings. And my father, a construction worker, who worked 7 days a week. And, you know, sometimes we made it. Most of the times we made it, sometimes we didn't. Construction, there's good times and bad times. So I rushed home and I said, Dad, can you please explain this to me? I can't believe that this person makes so much money. And my father, although he wasn't a teacher by trade, he was one of my best teachers growing up, because he tried to explain to me, and someone being in middle school, that, you know, some people have different opportunities than others. And if you pursue a higher education, you might have a better shot at earning a livable wage and being able to take care of your family. So that's when it really struck me that I always knew I wanted something better for myself, but I didn't really quite understand what that was or what that would mean. So growing up, my family was always trying to shelter us, and they put us into all these programs, and we later understood that it was to try to keep us out of trouble. So there was one program where it was in the foothills, and it was a program coming from the south side. We had to travel about 30, 45 minutes, and, you know, I always had to worry about gas, and those were things that I don't think normal middle schoolers who didn't live in the south side of Tucson had to think about, is, will I be able to make it to this session or not? And I was just trying to relate to and get to know the different students from different high schools, and I was so excited. And there was one friend at the time that said, let's hang out. And I said, great. He said, where do you live? Let's go to the movies. And when I explained where I lived, which was the south side of Tucson, he said that he talked to his parents, and that his parents explained that he couldn't go past the railroad tracks, which was, I forgot which street at the time, but because it was dangerous, and he couldn't go past Speedway, I think. And I was so embarrassed, and I came back and told my parents, and I said, what do they mean? The people around me are such good people, and I feel safe, even though sometimes, you know, we have to be in after midnight. But for the most part, I felt safe, and everyone around me was growing up, I understood they were so hardworking, and it was a very tight, close-knit community that I lived in, predominantly Latino and some African Americans, and we all played together, and I just didn't really quite understand it. It brought me a lot of, I felt that he was trying to bring me some sort of shame, but I didn't understand it. But I didn't let it break me, because I knew that there was other things that I could do to hopefully improve my community. I didn't really know what that meant. So at around the age of 14, 15, I started getting involved with politics. And through my involvement, I was able to realize that, you know, there's other communities, and they have better roads and they have better parks. And for some reason, their schools look better, and they're already talking about programs that I've never heard of. And I got really frustrated. I didn't really quite understand why such hardworking people like my parents and the people across the street just didn't have the same opportunities. And it had a lot to do with the people in power. I didn't really know what that meant because I never saw them, and they never really came to communicate with us. But I learned through my involvement in politics that these people could improve our roads, and they can improve the type of education that I received and the different opportunities. But for some reason or another, they never did, or I never felt like they did. So I was so frustrated. And when I graduated from college, my parents always ingrained in us that, whenever you finish college, you come back and you try to lift someone else up. And that's exactly what I did. I came back and I ran for school board. I currently serve in the same school district, the Sunnyside School District that I graduated in. But I'm still frustrated, mostly because I feel like even in holding a position of quote unquote power, I still feel like my community hasn't really improved, and no one really pays attention to us. So there was a position that opened up for supervisor. And I said, oh my goodness, my background's in public health, and I can potentially help finally change the way that our roads look and our parks look and improve our healthcare system. So I ended up running for supervisor. And it was a really tough race because I was the underdog, of course, and people like me are not really supposed to run for these types of positions. I got it from some of my friends and some of my family members who told me, what are you doing? You're crazy. There's already someone running. But I said, I think I can do a better job. And I know more than this person, even though they've been in office for so much longer. And it was the same drive that I had when I was in middle school, the same drive that I had when I was in high school, past college, still lit a fire within me that we live in a community that is so hardworking and deserves more, but we need better representation. So I ran and I lost, but my community I know won because they were finally able to get heard during the different conversations that we had. So I'm so hopeful for my community because the work is not done, but I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have ran, and I look forward to continuing to work in whatever position that is to try to improve it.
I met our next storyteller, Daniel Duncan, 15 years ago when I started working at Arizona Public Media, the PBS and NPR affiliates in Tucson. He's no longer there, but you might know him because he is the magic eye, the photographer, the photojournalist behind a program called The Desert Speaks that has aired at multiple stations in the United States and around the world. Not only that, right now he's also currently producing and being the photographer for another program called In the Americas with David Yetman. Along the way, he has won many, many Emmy Awards, and he has, of course, achieved other accolades. Daniel Duncan is a wonderful guy, and today he's going to share his story about another part of the world, the largest country in South America.
A very, very long time ago. I'm 50-something now, but I used to be 12 at one time. And at that age, I used to live in a very traditional suburb in Denver, Colorado. My dad was a pediatrician and specialized in public health. And my mom was one of those soccer moms who used to take us out to all those activities. And in our case, it was not just soccer, but the swim team. And I used to play lacrosse, and I was very involved in student council at school. So I lived a very, very comfortable, standard suburban Denver lifestyle. Very, very comfortable. So much so I felt somewhat invisible to the rest of the world in a way. Very well established, in the neighborhood and school and in sporting events and what have you. I even had a girlfriend at that time. We held hands and what have you. Very, very normal life. Probably no different than anyone else. Somewhat invisible to the rest of the world. Everything was so rock solid until one day my dad comes home and announces, pack your bags, we're uprooting everything, going to sell the house, and we're going to move to a very small coastal community in northeastern Brazil. Wow, okay. My world was just about ready to change, 180 degrees. Didn't speak any Portuguese, knew nothing about Brazilian culture, knew nothing about the country itself. Very shortly after that, we moved to, we had a stay in Washington, D.C. for an intensive language course that the State Department put on. My dad was going to be director of the land-based operation for Project Hope. Since he's a pediatrician, he was going to head up a large facility in northeastern Brazil in a very, very small coastal community. So we go through this very extensive language course, and we're like, adrenaline is rushing. We're moving to a different place, a different country, not knowing quite what to expect. Very different from that reality in suburban Denver, Colorado. So we moved to Brazil. We fly through Rio. I see some of my first soccer games. We went to Maracanã and saw a Flamengo Fluminense game. It was pretty exciting times for a 12-year-old. First time I'd actually ever left the country. Had a little bit of knowledge of Portuguese from that intensive language course, but nothing compared to what we were getting into. So we arrive in this very small town that if you look on a map, it's the point closest to Africa. And since it is a coastal community, fishing is a huge, huge activity. It's sort of like a livelihood of the locals, subsistence fishing. And they do it in these rafts called jangadas. And a jangada is a small boat that has no sides to it, that is 4 or 5 big logs tied together, kind of lashed together. And then it's got a cloth sail on it. And the local fishermen go out and they get their catch, their food for the day or for the week, and that's their livelihood. I never thought I'd ever actually go out on one of these jangadas, and I didn't for a long, long time. After being in Brazil, trying to fit in, trying to make friends, not really knowing how, I had a breakthrough 6 months in. I woke up one morning and I had realized that I dreamt in Portuguese. And that to me was a huge, huge thing. Because now my mind was becoming acculturated. It was becoming part of the Brazilian lifestyle that everybody around me. And perhaps one day through this, I could actually feel somewhat invisible. I could feel like I fit into the local culture, the local, knowing Portuguese, knowing the culture, and being accepted. Wasn't there yet. But I had this breakthrough. That night, the same night, I remember this so vividly, my dad came home, he says, get ready, tomorrow we're going on a fishing trip. And we're going to go on one of those jangadas that we've seen along the coast that the local fishermen go on. I'm like, wow, this is going to be great. A fishing trip for me was that traditional fishing trip out of San Diego or Florida where you go out in the big outfitter boat with all the big motors in the back and it's got the sidewalls and you just feel safe. It's got the radar and the depth finder and all that. This one did not have any of that. Of course, it was a raft, logs tied together with no sides, with a cloth mast, and the wind was our motor. So we wake up 4 a.m. in the morning. We drive to the little fishing village right next to where we lived. And the locals were out, okay, the gringos are here. They're going to go out. Ha, ha, ha. We were quite the sight. We get on our raft, and João Pedro was our pilot, our raft pilot. And we launch, and we're just really, really excited. As we launch, my dad turns to both me and my brother. It was basically my dad, my brother, and myself that went out on this fishing village. And he says, I think it would be a good idea if we all took Dramamine. And Dramamine, of course, is to prevent seasickness. I look at my brother and said, I'm not taking that. Hell no. I don't need that. 12-year-old, I'm not going to get sick. My dad was pretty adamant about us taking it, but we didn't take it, but he did. And so we're like, all right, let's go. So we're on the raft and we're sailing out and the wind is behind us and we're going through the waves and we look back and the land is getting narrower and narrower. And as we look back, our boat pilot, João Pedro, is sucking down aguardiente, which is Brazilian sugarcane juice, distilled, about 160 proof. And the bottle was half empty. So he'd been doing this for a while. And at that point, we're kind of thinking to ourselves in a selfish way, well, he's our only connection to land. He's our only connection back to safety. If he gets drunk, and I didn't really quite knew what drunk meant back then, but you had an idea when you're 12, right? Who's going to bring us back to land safely? Anyway, these thoughts are kind of going through your head, but adrenaline is rushing in, and we're almost to the point where you can't see land. I mean, just a little sliver of something, of sand way behind us. We're probably close to 10 miles out. And I turned to João Pedro and I say, João Pedro, onde é que a gente vai? You know, where are we going? And he says, tem uma Recife, mais 2 quilômetros mais para lá. You know, there's a little reef, hidden rock outcropping that has some big fish in it. And as we travel to this little reef, this Recife, he tells us a story about one of his fellow fisherman buddies who just 2 months earlier was killed in that very same place. He was killed by a big Montañez, a big stingray. And we're like, wow, okay. But it's really not, the adrenaline is still rushing. We're going on this fishing expedition and we're just about there. And as soon as we get there, João Pedro comes up to the front and he grabs the anchor. And the anchor is this big boulder and it's got this, these sticks tied around it with, you know, some wood out. And that's the anchor, tied to a rope. And he throws it out. And as he throws it out, I look over at my dad, who's kind of invisible, hadn't seen him the whole time. But he's up chucking. He's green, he's purple, he's yellow. He's sicker than a dog. And of course, he was the only one who took Dramamine. And he's definitely sick. João Pedro, he's got almost the entire bottle gone by now. So he's quite wasted. He's quite to the wind, so to speak. But my brother and I were to hell with them. We're fishing, man. We're throwing our line and we're like pretty excited about this whole adventure. Adrenaline's rushing. Not 2 minutes had gone by until my brother hooked into something big. And he starts pulling it back. And João Pedro is almost asleep in the back, and my dad is still up chucking, chumming the waters. We're thinking maybe a shark is going to come by with all the chum that he's throwing in the waters. And what my brother had in the line was a huge stingray, very similar to the one that João Pedro had described. Huge, massive. It was probably half the size of the boat. When you're 12, maybe your sense of perspective is changed a little bit, but that's how I remember it. The stingray gets closer to the bow, and João Pedro at this point wakes up and discovers that, oh, okay, we've got something on the line. And he sees what it is, and I see in his face a sense of fear. He becomes very lucid at this point. He wakes up, and he grabs a pole with a gunshot, a hook on the end of it, and he runs to the bow, and as the stingray gets closer, as my brother's pulling it in, he jabs the gunshot in the back of the stingray and pulls it into the boat. But as he does that, the tail of the stingray, and the tail has all these barbs on it, flips back and puts a huge gash across João Pedro's arm. Blood is all over the place. I mean, there's so much blood. It was all over us. It was all over him. The stingray is in the boat flopping around. João Pedro is there with a club trying to beat it, and all the blood is just spewing all over the place. At this point, my dad realizes that he's going to have to jump into action, that João Pedro is our only connection to land. João Pedro is bleeding profusely, and we have this rabid stingray in the boat. Now it's starting to die down, the activity of the stingray, but it's still at the bow of the boat. João Pedro unhooks it and ties it up, and at that point, his adrenaline starts to die down, and he realizes how serious the wound was. My dad jumps into action. He finds a fish hook. It was a big old rusty hook that looked like one of those that you hook sharks on. And he got some very strong leader, and he starts to suture up the wound that João Pedro had in his arm, realizing that this was the old man, again, selfishly, that can get us back to land, our only connection to land. he was able to do that after like probably 20 stitches, huge, huge stitches. He found a little bit of aguardiente that was still left in the bottle. He throws it on the wound after he stitches it up. And then Juan Pedro is still kicking, but he's very, very pale on his face. At this point, it's time to go back. The winds have changed, and we're sailing back to land. We haven't seen it yet. We think where it is, but we're still trusting Juan Pedro's gut instinct and his experience. Several other jangadas, similar boats that we were on, have passed us in the meantime, and they know exactly what happened. There was communication between the other boat pilots and Juan Pedro. And finally, we get to land. The whole community, the whole fishing community was out on the edge of the beach waiting for us to arrive. And as we get there, a huge greeting. People were yelling and clapping, and they knew exactly what had happened, what had transpired. At that moment, we felt one of them. We felt one of the locals. We had become baptized in a sense, baptized with blood, with water, with even alcohol. And we felt somewhat invisible at that moment, similar to how we had felt when we were back in that suburban Denver, suburb. We felt connected. We felt connected to the community. And it was that point that we felt that we belonged.
Thank you very much to all of you for listening to these wonderful storytellers with their amazing recollections of some of their experiences while growing up and also during much more recent times. And I would like to thank all of you personally: Czarina Nafarrate, Albrecht Classen, Alma Montañez, Diego Javier Lopez, Consuelo Hernandez, and then Duncan. If you enjoyed this show, please stick around. We will have announcements. We'll also have some information about virtual opportunities to watch more Odyssey Storytellers at work. Thank you, Ana Montañez, Executive Director of Odyssey Storytelling and the producer of this show. There's a lot of work that goes behind this, making phone calls, getting bios, getting pictures, setting up meetings, learning how to work with Zoom, which we are all doing right now in the process of this coronavirus. And thank you, Miles Schneiderman, the tech coordinator, for your work and putting this all together and making it possible as well. My name is Tony Paniagua. I really appreciate your time. And please say hello to somebody, take care of yourselves, and be a good person. Don't let anybody be invisible.
Hey there, everybody. I miss your lovely faces. This is Anna again, your executive producer of Odyssey. I am coming at you from my home once again here, wrapping up our show. Just have a couple of quick announcements for you. First of all, if you liked what you heard tonight, I want to encourage you to you just get more involved if you'd like in some of our bilingual, bicultural communities that we've got here in Tucson. So I've got two possible suggestions, but absolutely, if anybody's got other suggestions, feel free to post it on our Facebook page and we can let each other know where to help folks out. The first one is Casa Alitas, which Diego Lopez, who was on this show, Storytelling, he was actually telling that story about Casa Alitas. So if you're not familiar with it, it is a program of Catholic Community Services of Southern Arizona. You can absolutely find out about them by searching for them online. But they do have a page on Facebook. So you can go to Casa Alitas Friends at Facebook specifically and find them. And that's Alitas, A-L-I-T-A-S. So you can find out more about them. And then the second is actually spearheaded by our good friend and volunteer, Barbara Ainsworth. And it's called Iskashita Refugee Network, which if you've been to any of our live shows, you probably have heard about them because they do lots of really fun potlucks and other fundraisers for sure. You can check out their website at iskashita.org. That's I-S-K-A-S-H-I-T-A-A, iskashita.org. And of course, you can also find them on Facebook. So always encourage y'all to check that out. And obviously, you know, if you are able to, donations are always great for any of those networks or nonprofits, ourselves included. We are a nonprofit, as a reminder. And so if you are interested in donating to Odyssey, your donations do help to keep us alive. You can check us out at odysseystorytelling.com. And right there on the front page, you should be able to see a link to make a donation if you wish. We only have about 3 shows left for the rest of the year. I can't even believe this year's already gone by so quickly. So I'll tell you really quickly what those themes are. The last 3 shows of the year are as follows. October, Stranger Things. So if you've got any Stranger Things story, any kind of eerie, weird, quirky, creepy kind of stories, come through definitely with those stories. And you want to direct your message to Roscoe Mutz or Steve Braun or myself, and let us know that you are pitching for Stranger Things. Our November show is Karma. So Ethel Lee Miller, and of course our amazing Bella Vivante, who normally says hi to everybody at the door and greets you all. They are in charge of November for Karma. So if you've got any karma stories about the effects of karma on your life, or any karma effects that you've seen anywhere else, absolutely submit those. We're also taking stories for that right now. And lastly is Snowflake. Snowflake is our last theme of the year for December, and we're also taking stories for that. Phil Gordon, who you might know as part of our community as well as from the comedy community, is spearheading that one, and we're super excited for that one too. So you might ask yourself, how do I pitch a story? Well, if you've never done that before, if you know one of us personally, obviously you can get in touch with us. But if you don't, you can just go to odysseystorytelling.com and submit on the page, or you can email stories@odysseystorytelling.com. So one more time, that's stories@odysseystorytelling.com. Submit your story there. We'll take a look at it. And then of course, we'll get in touch with you as quickly as we can. And whenever you're interested, even for next year in any additional themes, we're always happy to, talk to you about that as early as we can. As we start to get closer and closer to the date, sometimes we can't squeeze everybody in. So you want to submit as soon as possible. All right, everybody, that's all for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the show. We were so happy to have you. And of course, as always, until we meet again in person, we will continue to be here, your loyal Odyssey family, online doing your virtual shows for you, and on our podcast as well. So please follow us, subscribe to that podcast, subscribe to the YouTube, stay in close touch with us so you don't miss a show. Until we see you again, take care, everybody, and stay safe.